Hi, I'm Michelle Nellenbach, the Director of Strategic Initiatives here at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Thank you for joining us today, and I am thrilled to be able to talk about water infrastructure, particularly in rural America, and how we incentivize private investment there. And we're joined today by Sarah Klein, who is a BPC Fellow. She's a recognized leader in transportation policy with a specialty in public transportation. She was formerly with the Senate Committee on Banking, and Ted Steiger, who is with RCAP as a policy director. He is responsible for their national policy and legislative activities. RCAP is an association that works closely with USDA and rural water utilities. So thank you both for joining us. So Sarah, you've been working on a P3 paper for the Bipartisan Policy Center. One of the chief concerns let me back up a second. So a P3 is a public-private partnership. It's basically marrying private companies with public infrastructure assets. And there's a lot of concern among policymakers that you can't do that very effectively in rural America. And so we want to talk a little bit about how you can. So do you want to tell us a few snippets about the paper?
Sure. Thanks, Michelle. So you're exactly right in stating what our goal was in doing this research. So we have heard from a number of folks that public-private partnerships, P3s, may work very well for big, large projects in large urban areas, but they absolutely couldn't even be on the table in rural areas. And so we set out to determine, is that true? Is it true that P3s can or cannot be used in rural areas? We determined that yes, they can, actually. There are a number of examples throughout the country, actually, of P3s in rural areas. Now, just because examples exist doesn't mean it's easy. It is not easy. It is still complex. It still requires a lot of effort, of expertise, of people coming to the table and working together to make these projects happen. But it definitely is possible, and it's something that should be encouraged.
Great. So Ted, like I said, your organization works in rural communities, a lot with water utilities. I think one thing that folks may not be aware of is that while the majority of Americans live in and around big urban centers and so therefore are served by large water systems, the majority of water systems actually represent folks who are communities of less than 1,000 people. I mean, they're very small, and that's most of the systems. You have been encouraging those communities to work together. As opposed to having 53,000 water systems trying to comply with every federal and state regulation work together. What are the benefits of thinking regionally, and how would you suggest communities get started?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, Michelle, and I want to thank you both for having this discussion and appreciate BPC's work surrounding not just issues in rural America, but how do we finance infrastructure for everyone, and how does that make it work? The Rural Community Assistance Partnership has been a big promoter through our TA work, technical assistance work, in trying to promote partnerships or regionalization. And like Sarah said, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's not an easy thing to accomplish, but I think how communities can really get started is if identifying common goals and common challenges, I think, to looking at your challenges of your water system, whether or not you're having financial problems, or your rate structures are not sustainable, or you're having compliance related problems. So we really encourage regionalization based on those communities' needs. And we certainly stress that it really takes leadership capacity, and it takes technical assistance sometimes to really be that facilitator. We have examples where our framework has been proven to identify that local leadership to make regionalization happen. We understand that it might not be workable in every instance, but when you look at some of the benefits, I mean, we really focus on long-term sustainability and affordability of your water system. I think regionalization can really help if you share services, not just, when we talk regionalization, we're not talking about just connecting pipes. That could be something that could occur longer term, but how about shared services, having one operator versus having 5, lowering your water rates, or needing to perhaps increase them for the short term for greater profitability long term. So those are some of the benefits. I mean, we could be here all day talking about the benefits of regionalization, but we have encouraged at least federal policymakers to take a look at it, to perhaps maybe do a pilot program that would encourage federal agencies, state and local, to kind of look to those best practices and where it has worked. We have one example, at least in Delaware, where there were 4 small community wastewater systems servicing, we're talking about less than 40 people. And they were all having similar challenges with being able to pay their rates, being able to maintain compliance with state and federal standards, Safe Drinking Water Act and Clean Water Act. And what we were able to do is 3 nonprofits came together, we were included with that, that came together to form the first nonprofit wastewater utility in Delaware called Clean Water Solutions, where this is an example of both a partnership example, but also too using P3s. We are providing the community and the community development piece and communication piece for that nonprofit, but it's bringing together 5 systems, and it will have the ability to take on smaller wastewater systems throughout the state. But what made it work? It was partnerships with both USDA Rural Development, the nonprofits involved, the larger water utility in that area, and the state's congressional districts. So that's just an example of where we have found regionalization to work in rural areas.
That's great, because like you said, that example sort of addresses a number of the challenges to this. And talking about P3s, private companies, if they're interested in infrastructure, they want to build, around here the mixing bowl or the large infrastructure projects. They're not thinking I should go to Delaware and invest in this system that it serves 300 people. And so that's where the regionalization comes in. If you can bring them together, it makes it a much more attractive investment for private entities. And to that point, Sarah, a lot of the attention is on this project bundling. Why should rural areas consider that?
So, Michelle, that's one of the most exciting things happening in rural infrastructure, I think, is the idea that you can bundle projects together to get a better efficiency, better economies of scale, and to attract the interest of private investors. So, take an example, the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation actually packaged together 558 small bridges scattered all around the state in very rural areas into a single procurement and basically put that out for bid. And there was a private company interested in coming in, working to repair and rehabilitate those bridges and then maintain them over time. And the advantage of that for the state is that they got these 500, they will get in the next 4 years or so, these 558 bridges into great condition when it would have taken the state, if they had done it on their own one by one, about 15 years to complete that whole project.
Wow.
So by putting those bridges together, the company that's going to repair them is able to do, one staging area for 5 or 6 bridges instead of one staging area for each individual bridge. This saves costs. They're able to order parts for 500 bridges all at once instead of over and over again for one bridge at a time. Again, it saves costs. So it also, by putting all those bridges together, made the project of a scale where those types of efficiencies really were some significant cost savings and attracted the interest of this private consortium that's working to do the bridges. So this is a great model for rural communities to consider. And in this particular case, the leader was really the state. And the state has control and oversight over a lot of bridges. So they had a lot of assets they could bundle together. It might be that you're a city or a town that has, 1 or 2 bridges that you need to do. But maybe, as Ted was saying, look to other people in your region. Are there other places that have a couple of bridges? Can you work together to put those assets together into a single package and bring down the costs for everybody? So this is something that I think we're going to recommend in the report, that rural communities start to look at, and even that the federal government look at establishing a pilot program, like you were talking about, to encourage regional coordination, a pilot program that would incentivize states, counties, towns to look at bundling projects.
That's great. So you both mentioned something that the federal government can do to address P3s and water infrastructure in rural America. The administration is working on a package now. It's our understanding it will include some private incentives, and so you both mentioned a pilot program. What else should the administration have in its proposal to help rural America do its infrastructure?
Go ahead.
Well, that's a great question, and you know, we have been weighing in with policymakers on these issues for a long time. Whether or not you know, looking at certain USDA rural development programs, you know, farm bill debates are heating up now as well, and how can this infrastructure package really benefit those most in need, and those most in need in rural areas. And we believe that it has to take a blend of not just existing programs, but also too, you know, stressing the importance of USDA's water wastewater grant and loan program. A lot of times rural communities having that grant match is super important. And I think you know, loan programs are great, they can be effective, but at the same time, you know, low interest rates, longer terms can really be effective for small and rural systems. And we also stress the importance too of utilizing existing structures. I mean, we don't want to have to reinvent the wheel with your relationships between local government partners, technical assistance providers, state. So there are already a lot of existing networks out there that provide assistance for small communities that are out there free of charge to the communities. So working with existing structures, I think, is important, and not trying to reinvent the wheel on everything, I think is important. And those are just some of the few topic areas I think that we have been stressing to the administration on the next infrastructure bill.
Great.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, actually. I think what you said at the outset, that a blended approach is the right one, is really, really important. Nothing is going to replace the importance of grants, actual funding for rural communities. Rural communities have fewer resources at their disposal to kind of pay for these projects. Having that federal grant support is extremely important. At the same time, there are other things that would help put this money to good use and make sure that it's used effectively and efficiently, and delivering the best results for the residents of these communities, such as including as part of any federal program a very strong technical assistance component. And I know that your organization works extremely hard on this as well. But some of the things that have been, that are typically done as part of technical assistance don't necessarily go deep enough for rural communities.
Okay.
So there's a lot of information online. There's a lot of resources if you know where to look. But I think that for rural communities, often the challenge is they don't have the time to look at every resource online. They need someone to kind of come with them, help point the way. So there are some models that USDA has used, that Department of Housing and Urban Development has used, where they either work, they typically work through other organizations to actually send people to a community, send a person to a community who can stay there for 3-6 months or a year or two even, to help get a project done. Because it's not cost effective for that community to hire on a staff person that has all of the required expertise to deliver a project. But if the federal government can help to support that effort by providing some of that expertise through a person who can be there on the ground, that would be tremendously valuable for rural communities, and I think would really move the needle in getting a lot of rural infrastructure projects done, as well as helping to bring more private sector capital into the mix.
And we,
Because you all do some of that already with water.
I mean, we do a lot of that, and we have stressed too that technical assistance can also be an effective use of saving public taxpayer dollars in terms of finding upgrades that are workable for that community, and also too, you know, looking at, is this cost effective, but also protecting public health. We've, in a number of instances, we have worked with a community. They were going to go another route that was going to be very costly and lengthy, but we were able to find a workable solution to them that would address some of their immediate needs, also help with long-term goals, but actually saving taxpayer dollars. I think that's important when you look at federally supported programs that actually save communities money in the long term.
But with so many water systems, so again, 53,000 drinking water systems, and then on the wastewater side, there's about 16,000 or so nationally. You know, and we've heard a couple stories about most of the operators of those systems are part-time. So it would be very challenging for an organization like yours to get to 53,000 different systems, and so that sort of speaks more to the need to bundle or regionalize these projects.
Yeah, exactly. And I know the Environmental Protection Agency over the years has looked at regionalization and partnerships, and they've been having convenings. I mean, there's a lot of different organizations that have been at the table. RCAP has been included on ways that, you know, how do we address these issues? I mean, when you look at the Clean Water Act back in the early 70s, the federal government, you know, was giving out grant money to build wastewater treatment facilities. And if you look at the funding stream now, those programs are no longer available. So how do we, now that these systems have reached their life expectancy, how do we upgrade them without that grant component? And so that's what we've been spending a lot of time working with communities on, is how can you either bundle, how can you either you know, put together a wide you know, a wide portfolio of funding options. And so that's a great point to that too, on you know, there's just the sheer number, and making, and goes back to the point of how does regionalization work? It's different for every community, and really focusing on that human infrastructure. You can build a whole new system, like you said, but if you don't have the operators, you don't have the skilled expertise. The average age of an operator now is close to 60 years old, and we've been trying to work with you know, different workforce agencies, community colleges, Department of Labor, on promoting it as a viable career, especially in rural, that there are jobs out there that it requires skill, it requires a lot of different sciences. I mean, it requires a lot more skills than I have. I've been out there actually in some of these systems, and it really is an exciting job and profession. So trying to encourage that as well, and systems could use one operator. 6 small systems could use 1 or 2 operators, and then that in an event of an emergency, as we've been reading about a lot now with the latest hurricanes, is are you prepared for a weather event like this? And so there's just so many, you know, topics surrounding water and how it's related to economic development, how it's related to community development even. So.
And I think that's an important point, because I know a lot of folks, when you talk about bundling or regionalization, communities are very proud of their water systems. Someone else had pointed out that when you drive into a town, the first thing you see, in many cases, is that tall white water tank with a name on it. But it doesn't mean that you have to give up ownership of that. You can bring in a private partner. You can, like you said, have one operator that works with 6 nearby communities. So it has a lot of different definitions.
Yeah, and it's up to those communities to create the new water system partnership. I mean, the board is still going to be locally controlled. I mean, it is still going to be a locally driven effort, and it's going to take various local leaders and leadership development to make that happen. So it's still, I think, a locally controlled project, and I know that sometimes that is a fear, whether or not regionalization, we would lose control. And you know, we really try to stress that that's why it takes a lot of people, and that one of the first steps you need to do is find that local leadership committee that's maybe willing to make this happen. And this might, like you said, this might not be a 6-month. This could be. We have some examples in New Mexico where they were facing competition of takeover from a larger utility. 5 or 6 got together. It was about a 7-year process. But you look at them today, they are almost as competitive as some of the larger systems in the state, because they decided to regionalize 6 different systems, all working together, and their rates are great. They're competitive, and it was also the threat of a larger takeover by another utility with even further control. So that was another example we had in New Mexico.
And I think you've hit on a really important point, actually, which is the need for education and people to have a common understanding of what some of these terms might mean for them. I mean, to some extent, people hear the word regionalization, they think it means something, when in fact there could be a range of solutions. Sometimes people hear the word public-private partnership and they think that means something that that they don't want, when in fact it also is a range of solutions. So I think there's more education, more of these examples, and that's actually also part of the purpose of the report that we're putting out, which is to show some of these examples so people can see that P3 doesn't mean just one thing. There's a whole range of things that a community can accomplish using a P3 approach. Similarly, there's different ways to do regionalization, to do bundling, and all the educating the private sector as well as the public agency leaders is also really important. There are opportunities in rural areas. There are projects that are going to be good for the community and an interesting investment for the private lender. Sometimes you just need that intermediary, and in fact, USDA has a loan program actually where they, instead of using USDA money, they're actually serving as kind of the middleman, the matchmaker between private lenders and rural projects, because sometimes it's just an information gap.
That's great.
So.
Well, we could talk about this all day. So with that, we're going to bring it to a close, but I want to thank both Ted and Sarah for being here today.